Thank you so much. And everybody here, thank you all for being here. It's great to have you all. This guy needs no introduction, but this is Sebastian Junger, everybody. Give him a round. So those of you that don't know me, maybe I'm not nearly as legendary and awesome as this guy, but I am Maximilian Uriarte, and I created a comic strip called Terminal Lance. I am a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, right? I'm not a Marine active duty anymore, but Sebastian here, though, has just released a new book called Tribe, and we are going to talk about it a little bit. So, Sebastian, why don't you tell us a little bit about your new book?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming out tonight. So when I was young, my late teens, early 20s, I had a sort of uncle figure in my life named Ellis, a mentor. And he was half Lakota Sioux, half Apache. And he was born on a wagon, literally on a wagon, out west. And in 1929, he was incredibly well-read. He'd read from the Greeks on up. He just had read everything. And a source of incredible wisdom for me, lifelong wisdom. He's long since died. But when I was young, he said to me, he said, you know, it's funny, the white people were always, along the frontier throughout the history of this country, the white people were always running off to join the Indians. And he said, but the Indians never really were interested in running off to join the white people. And why would that be? And furthermore, that there were, the American Indian tribes would often capture people in the frontier and adopt them into their tribes, into families. And often when those people had the chance to be repatriated because of a peace settlement or whatever, often they wouldn't want to go back. And I thought about this my whole life, and I wondered if it was true. I wanted it to be true. It seemed like it was true, but I wasn't sure. And Ellis often told me things that should be true, and the world would be a better place if they were true, but I was never quite sure if this was one of those things. So anyway, many, many years later, I became a journalist, and I was with American forces in Afghanistan. And we were at OP Restrepo. I was at OP Restrepo, a very tough deployment. My first day up there, we were in four firefights. The outpost got attacked 4 times. That was just the beginning. I almost got killed that day, actually. And went on from there for the rest of the year. And finally, it was time to go home. And the guys were psyched. They were based in Vicenza, Italy. And boy, were they psyched to go back to Vicenza. And they had all kinds of activities planned that I probably won't go into tonight. But at any rate, that went on for a while. And then when I caught up with them a few months later in Vicenza to interview them post-deployment, sort of like in hindsight, what was that experience like? Most of them wanted to go back to Afghanistan. They wanted to go back to OP Restrepo. They did not want to come home. And I remembered what Ellis said. Nobody wants, people go native, but they don't go civilized. And it was the same thing was happening. And so when I started to ponder the incredibly high rate of PTSD in the guys that I knew and just generally in the US military, it occurred to me because only 10% of the military actually experiences combat. The rest are support units. It's incredibly important, but they're actually not getting regularly traumatized the way civilians often picture in war. And I thought maybe the problem actually isn't the trauma. I mean, humans evolved to deal with trauma. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we couldn't survive psychological trauma. We wouldn't exist as a species. Clearly, we can recover from that kind of thing. Maybe the problem is coming back to modern society from the kind of close-knit existence that happens in a platoon. Maybe the problem is going from the tribal to the civilized, and it's just psychologically not that easy to do, and it never has been. And what many veterans are struggling with, suffering from, is actually that transition more than it is the trauma they might have experienced. And so that's the basis of my book, Tribe. I'll talk more about it later, but that was the sort of initial thought that got me pursuing the topic.
So I read the book over the weekend, and I absolutely loved it. And as a Marine, as somebody that's very active in the military community, I noticed you had a story come out on Task and Purpose, and I noticed some of the comments were a little offended at some of the points that you make in the book regarding PTSD, and how the military sort of deals with that, and how society kind of deals with Marines and soldiers and airmen and sailors and some coasties with PTSD. Got to get them all in there. So I'm wondering, what's the reaction been from the military community? Because I know that it's not specifically a military book, but the title is the tricolor camo pattern here in the text. So I'm wondering, I think that military does sort of play a pivotal role in your book. Like, what kind of a reaction have you gotten from the military community?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. And actually, the cover design was a matter of real debate between me and my publisher. And initially there was a impulse on their part to put a soldier with a gun on the front. And I'm like, listen, I'm talking about tribe. I mean, tribes have children, tribes have women. Tribes aren't just warriors. Like, it's everybody. And this book is about everybody. It's about us. But what was interesting to me about vets is that I thought I might be able to see modern society more clearly if I looked at it through the eyes of people who were from there and had gone away and then returned. What the society looked like to people who have gone through that cycle. Not just soldiers, Peace Corps volunteers also, as it turns out, really, many of them really struggle to come home. It's hard to move to a small village in Cameroon, for 2 years coming from this society, and it's even harder to come back. What is it that's so hard to come back to? And so the response that I had from the military, from vets, soldiers, I've been getting a lot of emails and such from psychologists within the military system, has been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, along the lines of, wow, this is exactly what I've been struggling to figure out how to say. This is it. This is the thing. I think what it does, among other things, is it allows people. I mean, the term we all have is PTSD. If you've been deployed and you come back and you're messed up, you must have PTSD. But because such a limited percentage of soldiers actually experience combat, it leaves other soldiers, other vets, who really, truly are struggling back home. They truly are. They truly are depressed. They truly are alienated. But then when they try to explain the origin of their problems, they don't have an IED to point to. They don't have a firefight. They don't have actual trauma to point to. And I think they struggle with, I know I'm hurting, but I was in a support unit. Like, why? What's wrong with me? And one of the things that I hope the book does is allow people to feel that they're not somehow faking it, or that their problems are legitimate. I had a really interesting conversation recently with a young woman who had cancer, and she said that her people, her family, her community, her tribe basically rallied around her when she was going through chemo. It was terrifying, and she beat the odds. She survived. And she said, it was really heartbreaking. She said, now I miss being sick. And she reminded me of soldiers who say, I miss the war. They don't want to be that guy, right? But they're being honest about it. Like, I miss the war. If you miss war, if you miss having cancer, there's something missing. There's something missing in this society, and probably for all of us. And so, anyway, long answer, but basically the military, with a few exceptions, because I think it has been a kind of dogma that's sort of built up around thank you for your service, PTSD, the heroes and all that, and I understand it comes from a good place. It comes from a place of gratitude and respect, but in the long run, I'm not sure it actually serves the psychological health of people who are just like us, who had an experience overseas, and we're trying to reincorporate that generation of soldiers, of vets, back into our society as people like us. And when you sort of separate them, when you put them in a different category, of suffering, of victimhood, of heroism, when you put them in a completely different category from sort of mere civilians, you're guaranteeing that they will never fully transition home. You're ghettoizing them in a place of valor, and it's still a lonely place to be. That's not a psychologically healthy place to be for any length of time.
One of the things that what you just mentioned about about Marine, I always say Marines, it's like my natural state of being, about veterans missing the war or longing to be back in combat, longing to be back in that situation that was actually really awful in a lot of ways. And I found myself personally even struggling with that a little bit when I came back from Iraq. And people that have read Terminal Lance know that I have a very unnatural disdain for the movie The Hurt Locker, because so it starts off, the title card of The Hurt Locker says war is a drug, and then that is the thesis of the entire film. But I think that Catherine Bigelow and the writer of that film kind of had it wrong. It's not that war is a drug, it's that coming home is terrible. And those are two very different sentiments, though. And so I'm wondering, like, how much you are, like, for all intents and purposes, you're way above and beyond the same level as most veterans in terms of, like, where you've been and what you've seen. How much of this was, inspired by your own experiences, or maybe even trying to come to terms with your own, processing it on your own?
Yeah. I mean, I've been a war reporter since the early 90s, and I definitely had, I've definitely been traumatized, and I definitely had a psychological reaction to it that puzzled and alarmed me, and that was going on for me before the U.S. was at war. So I hadn't even heard the term PTSD. I had no idea what it was. I came back from my first trip to Afghanistan was in 1996, and the most traumatic thing about that, it was full-on civil war, but I got incredibly sick with dysentery. I mean, dysentery was actually the big trauma of that trip. But in 2000, I was up north in Badakhshan a year before 9/11 with Massoud and his Northern Alliance. And back then the Taliban had, MiG jets, fighter planes, tanks. They had all the toys, and Massoud didn't have any of that. And a lot of soldiers actually don't know that. I mean, a lot of sort of young soldiers actually don't know that the Taliban. They think of the Taliban as like barefoot insurgents. They had the full deal until 2001, and we really got hammered a few times, and very badly, and it really shook me up. And I got home to New York, where I live, and I was a young guy. I didn't think anything affected me, and then until one day I went down in the subway, and I had this massive panic attack, and the train was going too fast, and like the lights were too bright, everything was too loud, and there were too many people, and they were gonna like turn on me and beat me to death, and the train was gonna jump the track somehow and kill me. Like everything was coming after me, and I intellectually I knew that it didn't make sense, but my body reacted as if I was in a life and death situation. I was just as scared as I'd ever been in Afghanistan, and I ran out of there, and I kept having panic attacks in small spaces, and I didn't get help for it because this is going to sound so stupid. I didn't get help for it because I thought I was just going crazy. Like, I mean, if I'd known, it was PTSD, and but I thought that I had a fatal flaw, and I didn't want to have that that process happen, I don't know, while I was in some kind of treatment. I was just like, if this is happening to me, it's happening to me. Well, let's just grit our teeth and see how it goes. But I was a bit of a stoic when I was young. And so anyway, what happened is what happens with most people who have been traumatized in a car accident, or their spouse dies, painful death of cancer, whatever. I mean, life sucks, life hurts everybody. Life trauma, no, it does. It traumatizes everybody eventually. And or in combat, what happened, the considerable majority of people naturally get over their trauma reaction. Something like 80% of people, PTSD is a transitory thing. It lasts a few weeks, a few months, and you climb out of it. And that's what happened to me. And then later, the long-term consequences of this came later and this is where I think soldiers have a tough time. When I was with 2nd Platoon in the Korengal Valley, we were getting traumatized less than I'd been when I was on my own. But there was an enormous amount of bonding and caretaking and sort of emotional exchange within the platoon. And that's what really altered me. And I came back and I jumped at certain noises and I had all those classic reactions. But really what happened was that I got just enormously emotional about all kinds of stuff all the time. And it was the consequences of having been incorporated into a group, finding myself caring as much about the welfare of those guys, some of whom I didn't even know very well, as I did about myself, understanding that they had similar feelings about each other, maybe about me, that incredible human connection in a dangerous place, a place where people were dying and we needed each other, that's what really altered me, and it kind of ruined me. And I came home and I was an unbelievable mess. But I think I would say that I was a mess for some healthy reasons. I'd finally been completely humanized and cracked wide open, and I couldn't believe what came sort of like pouring out of me. And among other things, my marriage ended. I got really real with myself. I couldn't really fake things anymore. And one of the consequences was my marriage ended. So this book, was it an attempt to process that? I don't know. But certainly the experience motivated me to understand something that I felt was missing when I came home. Like what was the thing that was wrong wasn't wrong out there. The thing that was wrong here. And I'm not even a soldier,
Would you say, so, you've been covering wars and sort of living this like war experience for a really long time. And in your book, you talk about kind of the responsibility, I think, of society to reintegrate people as much as it is on the veteran themselves to kind of come back and like as far as how the society takes in veterans and treats them with, unrelenting patriotism and thank you for your service and all that stuff. Do you think that's gotten better or worse over the years and with these new wars that have come around over the last 15 years or so?
Well, I think that sort of like veneration, thank you for your service. The problem with thank you for your service is that it feels reflexive. It doesn't actually feel that I was coming from a thoughtful place. It feels almost like, when someone sneezes, you say, God bless you. It's like, are you really asking God to bless me? No, you're actually not. It's just and are you truly thanking me for my service? Like, if you are, that's probably a longer conversation. But, and you probably don't actually know what I did, right? The service you're thanking me for, I could have been a cook on a big base. I could have been whatever. I think I'm guessing for veterans, and you're the vet, and we can, I actually like to turn this around and start asking you about that. But I think for veterans, the unconscious problem with that well-intended sentence is that that the subtext of it is that a very small percentage of people are protecting the country, and we in society really don't have any investment in your experience. And in Israel, over half the country serves in the military. They don't all serve in combat, but they're all in the military. And people don't, in Israel, don't say thank you to your service. I say in my book, it's like saying to someone, thank you for paying your taxes. Like, if you belong to a country, you serve it. We all do, right? That is the idea in a country like Israel. Frankly, it's the idea, it's the basis of any tribal group, any communal group. If you're in the group, you're serving the group. And it doesn't even cross people's minds to thank people for doing that because it's inconceivable that they wouldn't be doing it. And I think one of the things about wealthy society, about American society, is that we're wealthy collectively, as a country. We're wealthy enough that we actually need the service of very few people in order to get by. And a few generations ago in World War II, it actually felt quite different. It really felt like, wow, it's going to take everyone in this country pulling as hard as they can to pull this off. And that, it's a reflection of our incredible security, our wealth. It's it's a reflection of a lot of good things, but the end result is we're kind of on civically speaking, where most of us are on autopilot. My father grew up in Europe. He came here during the war, World War II. He tried to join. He couldn't because he had asthma, and he watched a generation of young American men fight and die in his home country, saving his country of France and Spain. He grew up in Spain, but saving his country of France as well. And when I got my selective service card in the mail at 18, I don't know, do women know this? Like when boys turn 18, they get a card in the mail from their government that says, we want to know your address, how to reach you in case we need to draft you. Girls don't get this card. Boys still get it, right? And you fill the card out, and you send it back to your government. And if things go really badly, if something really bad happens, your government will call you and put a gun in your hands and say, now is time. And girls don't get this. And I got, this is after Vietnam, and I got that card in the mail. And every adult I knew was outraged by Vietnam, and they'd ended the draft, and I was like, I said to my father, what's this? Like, I'm not signing this, right? He's like, no, you're signing that. And he was my dad was a complete pacifist, right? Hated Vietnam. And he said, look, you don't owe your country nothing. He said, and you might owe your country your life, depending on what happens. But you don't know yet, hopefully not. And if the next war is an immoral war, then it's your moral duty to protest it. And if it's a war that you feel actually needs to be fought, then it's your moral duty to fight it. But you don't owe your country nothing. And I never forgot that. And when he put it that way, I was like, oh, signing that card was like, I was incredibly proud to be signing something that made me part of something bigger. And I think national service in this country, I think you would allow young people, when you ask people, what do you owe your country, it would give them an immediate and absolutely honest answer. I owe my country a couple of years of service, working towards the greater good. There you go. And I think if something like that existed, some of this weird, fraught, uptight, like super polite conversation around service and veterans and am I saying the right thing? I mean, it would sort of go away because we would all be part of this project. Some of us would be carrying guns, but all of us would be carrying something. And I think that would be enormously healthy.
Yeah, there's actually been a recent push, really, really recent, like within the last few months, to get women involved in the selective service, otherwise known as the draft. Basically, the government would send you a card, as he was saying, at age 18, and you fill it out, and it gives them all your information so that they can draft you. With women in the infantry coming in really in the last, this year, 2016, women in the infantry finally being a thing, there's been a push by some people to draft women in the event that there is a draft.
Yeah.
What I like about your book, too, is that because you're not military, I feel like you talk about the military and that experience of PTSD with just this impartiality that I feel like someone like me probably couldn't do because I am emotionally attached to my experience and to the military. And so I'm wondering, do you think that really benefits the conversation by being outside of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think impartiality allows you to see the truth more clearly. And someone once asked me what the definition of a journalist was. I said, I don't know where I pulled this out of my hat or whatever, but I mean, it's a tough question, right? Actually, what popped out of my mouth was a journalist is someone who's willing to disappoint themselves with the truth. In other words, you might have certain ideas about what you think is true or want to have be true, but a real journalist will disappoint themselves when they find out that reality actually doesn't conform to their assumptions. And so I guess another definition would be a real journalist is someone who's willing to upset people with the truth, and the truth is the only thing that's going to help anybody, any of us. And some of it's upsetting, I'm sorry, it is. And we all have narratives about ourselves, about our country, about, whatever. We have narratives about everything, and reality actually doesn't conform to it. We're watching a political campaign right now, which is like running straight into that sort of buzzsaw of reality versus narrative. And
It's a shit show, for lack of a better word.
Right. I didn't know if we could swear on stage or not, or I would have.
I'm a Marine, so they expect it from me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'd like to get into your brain a little bit.
Okay.
Can I?
Do it.
All right.
Absolutely.
So just for starters, just tell us about your amazing book. I just read it. I was sort of annihilated by it, actually. Frankly, we didn't really talk about it, but it really gutted me. So please tell us a bit.
I'm sorry that it annihilated you.
I love being annihilated. What are you talking about?
So the White Donkey has been this really weird personal story for me for a very long time. I mean, so during my first deployment to Iraq, during one of my first convoys ever outside the wire, I was in a mounted platoon. So we were in trucks every day. We were riding around in trucks. And I was the scene happens in the book too, but it's a little bit different in real life. In real life, I was in the second vehicle of our convoy, and I was in the back seat. My platoon commander was in the front right, and the driver was in front of me. And we're driving down Zidon Road in Iraq, and it's one of my first patrols ever, and I was just fucking terrified, like absolutely terrified, because in training, they're always telling you, oh, look out for anything suspicious in the road, look out for any potholes, look out for any dirt that looks upheaved, look out for trash. But they don't tell you that it's a third world country and there's just shit all over the fucking road. Like, it's horrible. Like, it's the worst. And so I'm terrified. There's just bottles everywhere. There's like just dirt all over the place. Like, I have no idea. And I'm just like really regretting life decisions at this point. I'm like, oh my God. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done. Why am I here right now? And I was pretty convinced I was gonna die. You know, like it was pretty bad. I wasn't like actively freaking out, but in my mind, I was like screaming as loud as I could. And all of a sudden, the convoy it stopped, like really, you know, kind of suddenly. And I remember nobody knew what was going on, and my platoon commander got on the hook, and he gets on the radio, and he goes, hey, Vic 1, this is Vic 2, why did we stop? And I hear my section leader, Corporal Albrecht, he gets on the hook, and I hear it over the speaker, and he says, there's a donkey in the road. Oh. And I'm like, okay, you know, there's a donkey in the road, I don't know what that means, but, and so, you know, at this point, I honestly can't remember if I got out of the vehicle or if I was in it, but I do remember seeing the donkey, and I guess there's something, maybe it was like 130 degrees outside, maybe I had some kind of heat stroke or something, but like this donkey, it was just, I'd never seen anything like it before. It wasn't crossing the road, it wasn't just standing there, it wasn't dead or anything. It was walking dead center in the middle of this little 2-lane road in the same direction that we were going, as if it was leading our convoy. And there was something about that image that just like baked into my mind. Again, it was 130 degrees outside, so. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so, you know, the donkey trotted along for a little bit, and eventually it moved off the road, and we continued on our way. It stopped us for a little bit. But there was something about this idea of this donkey, this benign animal, stopping our entire convoy. I mean, you know, we're a convoy of 23 Marines, 5 vehicles, loaded to the teeth with everything you can imagine, machine guns, grenade launchers, with the entire power and might of the United States military behind us, and we were brought to a screeching halt by this stupid animal, this ass, quite literally. And I feel like it really made an ass out of all of us in that one moment. And I couldn't stop thinking about it forever. It would not leave my head. It sort of plagued me in a way. And that really became the foundation of this narrative that I wanted to tell of the story of Abe, which is really a fictionalized version of my own experience going to Iraq as a Marine. What's it like to be a Marine and, you know, go to Iraq and come home? And so the White Donkey became kind of the beating heart of it. And actually, I didn't decide to call it the White Donkey until probably about 5 minutes before I did the Kickstarter campaign. It was really a last-minute decision. It was always Terminal Ants, the graphic novel. And then this donkey was like such an important part of it. I was like, I'm just going to call it the White Donkey, and I'm going to make this all about a white donkey and see what people think. And it ended up working out. And yeah, that's sort of the basis of it. And the story is It's about Abe, who, if you read Terminal Ants, he's the main character. Abe and Garcia, really, and kind of their surreal journey into Iraq and what it's like to be there, what it's like to come home from that as well. Yeah, that's the book.
So you told me something really intriguing a little while ago. You said that when you were 16, you protested the Iraq War.
I did, yeah.
And then, walk us through that path in your life, because I think people would be really interested.
Yeah, I mean, in the initial early days of the Iraq War, I did protest it. It was, 2003. I was still in high school, and I grew up in Oregon, which is a very, very liberal environment, if any of you have ever been up there. And, to this day, I think that the Iraq War, in a lot of ways, was a mistake. I think, and that's why I was protesting it. I didn't agree with the reasons for the invasion. But at the same time, that didn't stop me from wanting to enlist, because my political belief and my own sort of journey were very separate to me. So even though morally I didn't necessarily agree with the mission in Iraq, for me it was a very selfish journey for me to get to Iraq and to see combat and to see this experience, in a naive search for some greater enlightenment. So to me, the political spectrum of it was kind of irrelevant, and I think for most Marines it actually is. I think if you ask most Marines their political opinions, they'd either tell you to fuck off or they tell you they don't care, because they just don't. Like, Marines, for the most part, just don't care. It's irrelevant of the mission. And for me, it was really the exact same way. I just didn't care. I just wanted to go there. I wanted to see it for myself. And then I ended up in Iraq.
Sometimes when I think about this kind of topic, I think I've written a lot about dangerous jobs. And people are always asking, sort of demanding sort of justify the policies that they are being told to implement. And, soldiers are 19, 20, 21, and we're sort of asking them to hold a kind of like informal referendum in their platoons for whether the war is legitimate or not, and if they all vote that it's not, they don't fight. Like, I don't even know what the,
that does not happen.
It doesn't happen, and you wouldn't want it to happen, right?
Yeah.
It's not a referendum vote. I mean, the military doesn't decide what the military does. We live in a democracy, and a civilian government tells the military what to do, and it's not put to a vote by the soldiers. And if you really think about it, you wouldn't want it any other way. But well-intentioned citizens, I watch them do it. They do you have any idea what you're doing? These sort of absurd questions. And but the point I'm sort of trying to make is that we don't do that with anybody else. Like, no one goes to an oil rig worker and says, do you have any idea that global warming is destroying the planet? And if you did do that to an oil rig worker, he'd say, well, stop putting this stuff in your damn car. It's not my problem. You're paying me to drill this stuff out of the ground. Take some responsibility for yourself. And it's a very strange responsibility to try to put on the shoulders of a 19-year-old who chose to join the military in order to do anything his country told him to do, and then to be made responsible for what his country told him to do. It's an incredibly weird thing for civilians to do. It's a real head trip, and I never quite understood it. I mean, do soldiers sort of talk about it in those terms? Or
there was one time my section leader, Albrecht, who is in the book, he's a real person. He actually was my section leader. He told me there's 3 things you never talk about with Marines. And one of them is religion. The other one is their wife, and the other one is politics. If you avoid those 3 things, you will get along with everybody. And that's essentially what I did. And it's actually a lot of what I do with Terminal Ants, is I avoid certain subjects because they're very polarizing for people. I keep my personal opinions out of Terminal Ants, just like I did in the Marine Corps. I keep my personal political opinion out of my mission in the Marine Corps, because the mission always comes first anyway. So, yeah, I think it is a really inappropriate thing to put a Marine or a soldier or a sailor, an airman or a coastie in that position to have to answer for their country's decisions, because we live in a democracy, but the military is absolutely not a democracy on any level. So Yeah.
For me, the most affecting part of the book, I mean, interestingly, like, what Abe confronted over in Iraq was difficult and painful, but it didn't seem half as complicated as coming home and what his struggle when he came home.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where like our books have, so buy both of them. So the books have like this parallel where, Sebastian's book is all about the disconnect that people face when they come home and being, belonging to this tribe. And The White Donkey really ends with Abe coming home and really facing so many issues. And I feel like his book actually gave me a lot of perspective on like my own book, on like why Abe is feeling this way. I'm like, wow, because that's how I felt. I had no idea. And so like reading it was a really weird kind of parallel for me. Like they actually go together really well. And I think we both go together really well right here. We're both good looking, like we're, it's like, this is working, I think. But yeah, so I think that the biggest, what's so difficult for veterans, I think, in this day and age is the return home more so than anything else. And you see this increasing gap between the military and civilian people. And people in the military, it's a very kind of incestuous environment, not literally, but, well, maybe in some places in the South, but it's very like, military, they only want to talk to other military guys. They only want to be surrounded in this sort of like bubble of military agreement. And you repeatedly hear that all the time though, like, oh, I'm in college and I hate all these kids around here. I can't listen to anything they have to say. It's just so frustrating. And like I felt that too. Like I mean, we all felt that like coming back. But it's very unfortunate, I think. And I think that it's also, it's equally on the society to better reintegrate veterans and to provide them a safer place to come back to. And it's also equally on the veteran to come back and really put the effort into reintegrating back into society, because you can't expect a civilian to understand what you went through in that regard, and you can't force them to be on your level. You have to come back down to their level and be back in the society. You can't force them to do it for you.
Yeah, and I think sometimes one of the things that gets lost in this, I mean, I've heard veterans talk about, civilian problems, as if civilian problems are somehow less,
Yeah.
But civilians have car accidents. Civilians get cancer. Civilians, lose their children, in terrible accidents. I mean, the world doesn't take it easy on civilians either. And I think as long as, if you have two populations where one population doesn't dare criticize the other, and the other doesn't ultimately have respect for you're creating two nations ultimately, and it's really, really bad. It's hard on both parties, and it's really bad for the nation. And I think right now, I'm not religious, but I'm going to use the word spiritually anyway. I think spiritually the country is in, kind of a dangerous moment, actually. And one of the things that could actually help bind it together, regardless of our politics, the politics of this country are always going to be at odds, and they should be. It's a great dynamic argument that sustains a democracy. But there should be this idea that we're all in this together. And I think what the military-civilian divide, which, as you said, both sides are kind of like responsible for it, allowing it to happen, actually threatens to undermine the idea that we're all one country with shared common interests and a common goal. I mean, just unconsciously, it feels like, God, is this thing actually splitting up? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think that's definitely reflected in the modern political landscape too. I mean, yeah. It's pretty bad, the right and left whole thing. And what I think is really interesting about, in your book, you talk about PTSD. It's interesting to me how PTSD has become a military term. I mean, we hear PTSD and we think military. Like it's like a military thing. Veterans have PTSD. That's it, and veterans own that. But what's really interesting about in Sebastian's book is he talks about how there's other occupations, there's other things that civilians do that are not military that have even higher death rates than military. And people suffer from PTSD in all facets of the world in different occupations. It's not solely a military thing. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I found this incredible statistic. Workplace deaths are mostly concentrated in like a few jobs, like logging, commercial fishing. You know, there's sort of the same culprits every year account for most workplace deaths. They're mostly male, sort of working class males who die on the job. And workplace, I just picked a year at random, 2014, and workplace deaths in those kinds of jobs, dangerous jobs, there were almost 5,000 workplace deaths in this country in those kinds of jobs, which is close to the total deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan combined for both entire wars. That was just 1 year in the workplace. And we need, oil, we need lumber, we need fish, we need, farming is very dangerous. Roofing is crazy dangerous, and we definitely need roofs over our heads. Ironwork, high steel, like high-rise construction. I mean, all that stuff's incredibly dangerous. And forget about the fire department, and we need all of that as much as we need the military. And one of the conversations I've tried to have with people in groups like this is like, look, if we're going to consider ourselves a nation, and if we're going to get into the business of honoring and venerating people who risk their lives to keep this whole crazy thing going, as well we should. I mean, I'm like, yeah, let's do that. But don't stop at the military. I mean, if that's what we're doing, keep on doing it. And if you're going to be venerating loggers and fishermen and all these other people who are dying on the job, let's just keep going and venerate school teachers and whatever people that we need. I mean, maybe they're not dying on the job, but we still need, God forbid they somehow disappear. Like what would this nation become? And so if you start thinking like that, you're starting to think tribally. And even with and this has never been done before, but a nation of 320 million. I mean, it's a conceptual leap, right? But you can start to think in those collective terms, even though we have this huge unwieldy nation to sort of manage. It's just a mindset. I think that mindset we were much better at it after World War II. And interestingly, even though the casualties were way, way, way higher in World War II, trauma rates were way lower. Because I think they came back to a society that felt to some degree coherent. And keep in mind, people have said to me, when I say something like that, like, things just don't change like that. And I point out that in World War II, there were African Americans and white Americans fighting side by side on the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific. And when dying together, fighting together, helping each other, and when they came home, in some states in this country, those men could not eat side by side at the same lunch counter. Just think about that, right? And some of those people lived long enough to see an African American president. So can things change? Yeah, they definitely can change. And it's a matter of we as a society deciding we want that change. And if we do collectively, if we want that change, it is unstoppable.
Yeah, I think part of the issue too is that this war has been so different than any other war that we've ever fought. I mean, this is the only war that's gone on for like 14 years. And not that they're any less tragic, but comparatively, the death rate in the post 9/11 generation of war is so much lower than what we had in like World War II or even Vietnam. That I think that modern day veterans feel almost an obligation to recognize and compare themselves to the generations past, the greatest generation, World War II. But it was just a totally different time. I mean, back then, we didn't have the silent professional military that we do today, or at least what's supposed to be a silent professional military. A lot of them are very loud professional military. But we didn't have that. I mean, people were drafted. People were forced to go to these wars. People fought these wars because they were the right thing to do. And there wasn't really any question about it in society. And I think that modern veterans, often struggle with that sort of conflict. of, am I, I'm supposed to be a veteran. I'm supposed to be, what I have defined as a veteran via my World War II veteran grandpa or my Korea veteran, but we just aren't that. I don't know if we will ever be that. Like, our generation is not that. The world is not like that today. It's not so easily defined by good and evil like it was in World War II. So I think it's an interesting and weird place for veterans to be in a way that we've never really been before.
And keep in mind, like, this difficulty returning home is not new. This isn't a modern ill. I mean, this is hard not to mention, but the Odyssey is the Iliad is a tough book to read. The Odyssey is really nightmarish, and that's the struggle of the return home. But more recently, I watched an incredible movie about World War II called "The Best Years of Our Lives," and it's about soldiers returning from World War II. And, at first, I saw it, and I assumed that the title was ironic and bitter. They took the best years of our lives from us. And then you watch the film and you realize, no, they're actually being completely literal. Like, those were the best years of our lives. And there's an incredible scene at the end where the whole movie is about them coming home. And I think it starts on an airplane coming back, and there's a scene where these three guys get to their hometown. The families don't even know they're coming, right? And there weren't deployments back then. I mean, once you landed in Anzio and you were in Europe as long as you were alive, or until you got to Berlin. I mean, there were guys who were there for 3-4 straight years, and they came back, and apparently sometimes the families didn't even know that they were coming back, and these guys would come walking up the driveway, having not seen their families in a few years, and so they're driving around. These three guys are driving around in a taxi, sort of dropping each other off at their homes, and they're all super grim-faced. And they go to a bar to delay a little bit, and they have a couple of drinks, and they get back in the taxi, they drop one guy off, and then get to go to the next house, and the next guy, and the guy's like, they're parked in front of his house, right? He hasn't been there in 3 years. He's like, can we just go back to the bar and have one more drink before I do this? And they're like, no, man, you got to go home. Your family needs you. You haven't seen him in 3 years. You got to do it. And he takes a deep breath and he goes, I feel like I'm about to hit a beach. Think about that. Like, he was comparing walking in his front door to landing at Anzio, landing on D-Day, landing in Peleliu, right? And there was the emotional equivalent of that. And so this shit's been going on for a long time, and it's a tough thing. And I think the only way to help it, to make it better, is to figure out, even though we're no longer tribal, we no longer live in groups of 40 or 50 people on the high step, or whatever. Like, even though to figure out how to be a cohesive society, and we can do it. And I think if we make the changes that we need to help veterans, what really we'll be doing is saving ourselves. And if we do that, the veterans will be fine, because they'll be coming home to a society that's actually economically, spiritually, intellectually, politically, racially functional and integrated. And now they're not. And I think half of the troubles that they have coming back is precisely that.
Yeah, I think that the difference between, like, the modern wartime environment and returning home and, like, World War II is that back then, so, like, everybody was part of that. The whole nation was part of World War II. And so when you left, you came back, like, everybody understood, which you talk about with a lot of the Native American tribes in your book, how they, exist in a wartime environment, and their entire life exists in this wartime environment. So they don't have suicide problems. They don't have PTSD, because this is their life. Like, this is just it's normal. It's a base of normality that doesn't exist in a really cushy American, normal, wealthy society.
Yeah, I can't remember if I mentioned this or not tonight. I've been talking about this book a lot, and I'm sort of lose track a little bit. But I was amazed to find out that as wealth goes up in a society, the suicide rate goes up. As wealth goes up in society, the depression rate tends to go up. Modern society has 8 times the depression rate of the typical sort of subsistence level developing world society. It's incredible. If you think about the stress of poverty and all that stuff in the third world, and the depression rate and the suicide rate is way, way lower than we have. And we're the lucky ones, right? I mean, by all appearances. But it really makes you wonder what wealth is. I mean, maybe wealth is having a real depth and richness of human connection. Maybe ultimately that, I mean, if your measure is psychological health, then real wealth is human connection. That's what it is. And as we get wealthier, we lose that because we don't need other people, because we can sort of pay our way out of most of life's situations. And when you're poor, you can't. And one of the things I did in my book is to look at what happens when you take modern society and collapse it. How do people react? The Blitz in London. The Germans killed 30,000 civilians bombing London. And people were sleeping shoulder to shoulder in the tube stations and running bucket brigades to put out fires in buildings. And that civilians would be digging through the rubble to pull people out. And when they came across, badly wounded people, they just gave them morphine and moved on. I mean, that's what London was like for 6 months. And the authorities were braced for mass psychiatric casualties, of course. This is a civilian population getting bombed far harder than soldiers usually are. And what happened? That the admissions rate to the psych wards in London went down during the bombings. Down. Because people understood that they were needed by their communities. And that acted as an incredible buffer against their psychological demons. As one official said, we have neurotics driving ambulances. Another lady, a civilian, said, I find this very moving, she said, we would have all gone down to the beaches with broken bottles to fight the Germans if we'd had to. And when you have people thinking like that about their community, you have, weirdly, you have a kind of general psychological health in the population. And after the war ended, people in London said they missed the Blitz. I was in Sarajevo in the early days of the war, and I went back last summer, and this woman who was almost lost her leg to a tank round at age 17 during the war, 20-some years later, she admitted to me that people in Sarajevo missed the war. It's like that young woman who missed having cancer. What is missing? I think we're almost at the point where we have to take questions from you guys. Am I correct?
Correct.
Wow, the voice of God. Yeah. When that voice tells you to do something, you do it. So shout out your questions. We'll repeat it.
I'll bring a microphone.
Oh, we're bringing a microphone. All right, better.
Here. Just a quick reminder on questions. They generally start with a W or an H, and sometimes a D. And each of them can do follow-up questions.
I have to start with a certain letter. Wow. When you were talking, when you were talking, it made me think of, for some reason, people coming out of prisons as well, who, obviously a prison you don't think of as being a good place to be, but there's a sense of community and there's a sense of order and a sense of not assimilating when they come out and of being kind of lost. And I'm just wondering if in your writing and your research, if you've ever thought of that connection. Specifically you, because it kind of applies more to your book. And then for both of you, in your findings, if you've thought of some ways that some of these things can be helped and ways that people coming back from the military, we as citizens or we as a community can make things better, like practical things. Those are the two things that I was thinking of when you were speaking.
Maybe you take the second one, and I'll just go for the first one. I did think about the prison experience. One of the difficult things in sort of when you do research like this is separating out different factors. And there are a lot of people in prison who have very poor psychological health. That's why they're in prison in the first place. So if they get out of prison and they have problems, readjustment problems, they might be the same problems that put them in prison in the first place. So it's hard to sort of sort for that stuff, but anecdotally I've heard that it's very hard to leave the community of prison out into the outside world. And I talked to one person who worked with exonerated people who were exonerated and were taken off death row and let go back into the civilian population, off death row, okay? And what was their overriding feeling? One of guilt, that they left their brothers behind to die. It was exactly like soldiers. Incredibly moving. I mean, and you think about, I mean, humans that get such a bad rap, right? I mean, we're the worst species on the planet, you know, et cetera. But I mean, you think about it, like, one of the most common human reactions to the misfortunes of others is, damn, I wish I was there to share that with them and help. I mean, I lost a very good friend, Tim Hetherington, in combat, and my overriding, and I was 6,000 miles away. The first thing that I did was make it my fault somehow, and I know soldiers do that. I mean, I know you know about this. And then the next thing I figured out how to do was to wish it had been me and not him. Pretty confusing emotional territory, and it's really, really common. And that's it's puzzling but noble that we all feel this way, you know? I mean, that's a very common human reaction, even among very messed up people, like people on death row or in prison or whatever. They're troubled. Many of them are troubled people, and they're still reacting in these incredibly generous human ways to their brothers, however they define that.
To your first question, you know, the military and prison have a lot in common. No, I've heard actually that the prison food's better, but so
Yeah.
no, I think that what I think that society could do, I think ultimately, is just become more socially conscious of the fact that there are people at war and that they're gone and they come back, and like it's what I think in Sebastian's book really talks about it a lot, is this disconnect between the society and the people that go and fight the war. Like it has not traditionally been like this throughout history. Like, you know, we were talking about earlier, World War II, everybody was involved in that war emotionally and physically. Whereas now it's like, you know, you've got 1% of the nation actually going out and doing the stuff, and most of the people back home don't even know what's going on. They're like, oh, there's a war? What? Nobody told me. So it's I think that disconnect, and I think that everybody, if it's really just about getting everybody on the same page, and I don't know how like effectively to do that. I mean, you know, I don't have any suggestions, but I think that's sort of the direction that things need to kind of go in my opinion.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
We've got 9,800 troops in Afghanistan today, and it's going to be lowered to 5,000 next year. Do you support that policy, or do you think we should bring in more troops now, or do you think we should get our troops out totally faster? And in Iraq, I'd like to ask if you think that bringing out our troops of Iraq was a serious mistake, or do you think that the dissolution of Assad's government in Syria would have led to the rise of ISIS anyway? They would have gone back to Iraq, and our army would have been fighting a third war in Iraq.
It's all yours, man.
You know, for my opinion on the Iraq war going into it, I do think that pulling out of Iraq was a mistake, at least as early as we did. I think that created a lot more chaos than it should have, than it could have. Done correctly. I think it was kind of against most military advice to pull out of Iraq as soon as we did. And now we're really experiencing the aftermath and the effects of that decision, which is ISIS and the chaos and clusterfuck, for lack of a better word, that's going on in the Middle East right now. That's my personal opinion. I'm not an expert. He's probably more educated on this than I am. But as far as Afghanistan goes, I mean, I think everybody generally is on the same page in Afghanistan that it was a, you know, justified situation to be in. As far as pulling out of it right now, I think most of the Afghanistan veterans that I know and have talked to sort of generally feel the same way about Iraq as like guys like me do with Iraq, which is that, you know, we need to put the time into it. Like if we're gonna break it, we have to stay and fix it, you know, like that's how it is. And when you pull out, you create this immense destabilization in the area. But I think at the same time, for the American government, it becomes a question of, at what point do we stop? Because we can't be in this perpetual state of war forever. So it's a tough call. I don't think that there's any exactly right or wrong answer. I think you just have to make decisions and kind of stick with them.
I'll just quickly say that, I was against the Iraq War, and I didn't cover it because I didn't think I could be objective about it, so I stayed out of it. But that said, my understanding is that the forces President Obama tried to negotiate an agreement with the government in Baghdad for the continuing presence of U.S. troops, and could not succeed in getting them legal immunity in country, and there was a real legal jeopardy where they could be charged under Iraqi law for violations in Iraq, which is totally unacceptable to the U.S. military. So he tried to stay, and he had to pull out basically for legal reasons, and that's my understanding of it. It was a process that was started under President Bush, and Obama picked it up, and he had to pull out. So was it a mistake? I mean, if you keep 100,000 American soldiers somewhere, you're going to have a modicum of stability, and when you pull them out, it's going to fall apart. And the problem with Afghanistan, as soon as I was there during the Civil War in the 90s, I was there in 2000. As soon as NATO forces arrived in Afghanistan, the civilian casualty rate plummeted. That was an incredibly costly war for the civilians, civil war for the civilians. We made a lot of mistakes. The Taliban intentionally killed a lot of civilians, car bombs and that kind of thing. And even so, the casualty rate was lower than it had been during that awful civil war. We've more or less pulled out, and what happened? The casualty rate went right back up. If we pulled out completely, you could really risk a complete dissolution of that society and a complete bloodbath. So, people ask me am I anti-war? I'm like, no, I'm not anti-war. I'm anti-human suffering. And if keeping troops in a country prevents a bloodletting, then I'm pro. Want to call it pro-war? Call it pro-war. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But I'm for doing the thing that keeps civilian casualties at a minimum, whatever that is. And if that's pulling out, then pull out. If it's not, then it's not. But that for me is the metric. There isn't a sort of ideological idea of the military is bad, war is bad, human suffering is bad. And I saw NATO stop the genocide in Bosnia by dropping bombs on people, and I was totally for it.
Sebastian, you had. I just want to say that Restrepo, I saw it at Sundance, and it still haunts me. It was so harrowing. I'm over here.
Where are you?
You're
right over there.
Right here.
All right.
And you just brought up Tim Hetherington, who was your partner in making that documentary, who died in Libya, and we just had an NPR soldier die yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have, how that has changed your hesitation to going back into conflict zones, and if you still go into them.
Yeah, I found out by phone call. I was in New York City. Tim and I were supposed to have gone on an assignment together to Libya. Last minute, I couldn't go, as personal reasons. He went on his own, and then one morning around 10 a.m., the phone rang, and with the news that my good friend was dead. And I was married at the time, and my wife Daniela was very, very close to Tim as well, and she really loved him, as I did. And one of the first things that happened, in the next maybe 20 minutes in our sort of shock and grief, was Daniela looked at me and said, "You can't do this anymore." And I realized, the odds are pretty good. You're probably not going to get killed covering, most journalists don't get killed. But I realized that even if I didn't get killed covering war, every time I was gone, every time the damn phone rang, Daniela was going to have a shock. Daniela was going to feel terrified for a few moments. And I was almost 50 years old. I'm like, at some point you have to stop terrifying the people you love. Like at some point, you got to start living for their experience, putting their experience ahead of yours. And in that context, it made war reporting, it stopped seeming sort of noble and courageous and whatever. It just seemed kind of selfish. And at 30, it wouldn't have been selfish. At 40, maybe it wouldn't have been selfish. But at 50, and you're married, and you're aware of life and death and how precious this all is, I get killed. I don't have a problem anymore, right? What I've done is bestow a legacy of pain and grief on everyone I care about. And that to me, that's not a thought I would have had earlier in my life. That comes with maturity. And right then and there, I stopped. I decided to stop, and I've never regretted it. I miss it enormously, but I've never regretted stopping. And I think anyone who's stopped smoking cigarettes or stopped drinking or stopped doing all kinds of things knows that feeling of, boy, do I miss it, but boy, am I glad I'm not doing it.
Over here to your left. Do you still keep in touch with Sergeant O'Byrne and Pemble Belkin and Jones and Sergeant McDonough? And have they found another tribe since leaving 2nd Platoon?
Yeah, now I call him Brendan, but I stopped. It was so hard to stop calling them by their last names after they got out of the service. But yeah, Brendan O'Byrne and I are extremely good friends. He moved to Massachusetts, where I spent a lot of time. I used to be a climber for tree companies, and I still have my gear, and I still do jobs once in a while. And so I taught him how to climb, and so it was the kind of job that was sort of good for him. And we would do jobs together and stuff. And he went through some tough times. I mean, really tough times. And I would say he was probably in more physical danger to himself after he got home than he had ever been in the Korengal. I mean, literally. He wrapped his car around a tree, and and the medics came, and he got into a fight with the medics. I mean, he picked a fight. He was just. I was like, man, what's going on? I said you could get into a fight with a mailbox. What is going on with you? Anyway, he stopped drinking. He got into school. He's in his first. He's just finishing up his first semester at UNH. He's getting straight A's. He's an incredible story. And so I'm more or less in touch with a bunch of those guys, but particularly in touch with Brendan. He's a really important person to me.
Hello, over here on your right. Yes, I'm an active duty Marine right now, and stationed at Camp Pendleton. I've been in since 2012. I'm at 0331 infantry. So, in the first 2 years, the war in Afghanistan was still going on, and as a young boot, naive, I was still hoping that I get deployed to Afghanistan. I wanted that thrill, that excitement, that journey, but it never came. And over the years since then, after the realization I would never deploy, I got depressed and I went into a deep, dark place. And it made me feel guilty because I never went to Afghanistan, never went to Iraq. And looking after all my seniors, my mentors, looking up to them, they experienced way more hell than I have, yet I feel guilty. I feel inadequate as a person, as a Marine. And I feel like I live in the shadow of a 9/11. But I came to the conclusion that I guess it's not my life's purpose. I don't believe in God, I'm atheist, but I believe it was my time, so I got over it. But I noticed a lot of guys, and as you cited, that a lot of guys commit suicide or depressed. They are non-combat guys, POGs or support units, or I should say. However, what can you say to guys who never had their chance to get over it? What can you say to them in a healthy way, I should say?
Is that for me or for Sebastian?
For both.
Yeah. I would, actually, I literally just talked to the Marine Times last week about a story they did on suicide, or it was the week before. And they interviewed me for it just briefly. And one of the writers, he sent me an email, and he was like, hey, what are your thoughts on, suicide in the military, in the active military community? Is it a thing that people get stigmatized for getting help for PTSD and all that stuff, because that's kind of a cliche you hear all the time, is that Marines get stigmatized for getting help with PTSD. And I told him, no, from my experience, most Marines actually do not get stigmatized from getting help for combat-related PTSD, but there are so many Marines and soldiers and sailors and airmen and Coast that that have mental health issues that have nothing to do with combat, and those are the ones that get stigmatized the most, and those are the ones that have the most trouble getting help. Because if you try to go get help, if you, for instance, feel this way, and you have mental health issues where you are considering suicide, but that didn't come from a place of combat, you are really looked down upon in the Marine Corps. Like, there is no room for that in the Marine Corps. And I think that is just part of the culture. And what I would say to you, or to anybody who might feel like guilty or ashamed or whatever, that they weren't able to go experience this adventure of going to Iraq or Afghanistan, I would just say that outside of the context of the Marine Corps and the military and the whole boot senior shit show, it doesn't mean anything. Like, it really doesn't mean anything. For better or worse, as we've talked about tonight, it doesn't mean anything in the civilian world. Like, no, that means nothing to most civilians. Like, oh, I went to Iraq, I went to Iraq, I went to Afghanistan. That semantic use of the word of going to Iraq, of being on a combat deployment, just doesn't mean anything. Like, really, when you take a step back and look at your life, it's like, does it really matter that you didn't go? I mean, not really, unless you were gonna like write a book about it or something, like it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And I think that's hard for not just people that haven't gone, but for people that have gone and come back, and to realize that most people kind of don't care. Like, and that's hard to deal with on its own too. That's a whole other issue that we could talk about. But in the grand scheme of your life, and you're very young, not that I'm super old, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It's not going to matter 10 years from now, and why worry about it? That's my imparting wisdom. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, and I was surprised when I did the research that the data on suicide's pretty surprising. Like, there's no correlation between combat and suicide in veterans. Like, if you're in a lot of combat, you are not more likely to kill yourself afterwards. People who have traumatic childhoods, they have trouble throughout their life, whether they served or not. I mean, Brendan O'Byrne was an alcoholic, no fault of his own, but he was an alcoholic by age 14, and his father shot him twice in an argument. And then, he didn't finish high school because he was put in juvenile detention because his father shot him. And he went to juvie because he didn't want his father to be charged with attempted murder, so he claimed it was self-defense. That his father shot him in self-defense, and he went to juvie with 2 bullets in him. And he told this story out at Restrepo, right? And when it was about minus 20 degrees out one winter night, and just sort of, felt vaguely like hell on earth out there at the moment. And he said, without any irony whatsoever, he said, but it's all good, because if my dad hadn't shot me and all that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here right now. And he, I mean, that's some serious grunt thinking, right? I mean, it's like, but I mean, everyone kind of knew what he meant, I think it was sort of well understood by a lot of people that the military experience can strengthen you as much as it tears you down, can complete you as much as it fractures you. I think, and there were a lot of guys in the military who need completing, who need strengthening, or from pretty dysfunctional families, and they need something that brings order and discipline to their young lives and makes them feel competent and strong and competent and strong and needed by others. I mean, that feeling is gold in humans. And again, our society doesn't allow for it to happen very, very much, particularly with young people, young males, like, how do you get that? I remember being 18, just thinking, maybe if like a tornado hits Belmont, like, I can do something heroic. Like, I mean, I was like, what could happen in my hometown that would allow me to like do something heroic so that people could see that I'm that kind of young man? And I lived in an affluent suburb where nothing ever happened. I was like, maybe someone will try to knock over the bank. You know, like, I don't know. I was like, come on, make something happen. We didn't even have a bar in my town.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Oh, hey. So, Marine brother over there, never deployed. What's up? I deployed. Oh, you did? Good for you. All right. Shit, right? All right. So, here's my question. I mean, like, I hear him talking. I would say I deployed. I went to Iraq with you asshole.
We went to Iraq together.
You know, the first thing that happened to us was one of our lance corporals killed himself in the bathroom. All right? And we went through the deployment, no hiccups. And we got home, another guy killed himself. After that, another. And then Afghanistan happened, somebody else died. I hear you guys talking a lot about what's wrong with the people who are killing themselves or what's wrong with society, but why the fuck aren't we fixing it? You know, World War II happened and we were all involved. We were vested. My grandfather told me stories of how people held him up when he got home. My uncle told me stories about how he was beaten when he got home. And my friends, when they get home, they don't get nothing, not even recognized. We fought a war for 14 years. And why do you think that it's okay now in America to forget about your veterans? That's my question.
I don't think that. I think what the problem is that this war is unlike anything else we've ever had in American history. We've never been in this kind of a situation where we have this sort of like ongoing, perpetual 14-year war that America in general has gotten bored with, to say, for lack of a better word. I mean, they just don't care, because it's been going on so long. Nobody sees any results, and it's just like, okay, well, I don't know. There's a war going on in the Middle East, I guess. There's always a war going on in the Middle East. Like my whole life, there's been a war going on in the Middle East. It's really easy for Americans to turn that off and to say, this doesn't matter to me because it doesn't affect me personally. And it never does. It never, ever affects the average American on a personal level. And so the only people that are affected by it are the veterans, are the military, are the people in that community that are in that circle. And so I think that's a huge issue. And that's essentially why people do forget about veterans. And it's a really unfortunate reality in the world that we live in right now.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, and I'm really sorry for the people you lost. I think it's hard for the country to connect to a military that, frankly, is so small. I mean, it's a really small number of people compared to other wars, and I think it's easy for the experiences of those people to fall through the cracks. In World War II, it just couldn't. The numbers were just too big for that to happen. And I mean, I have a friend whose father fought in World War II from North Africa to Anzio, all the way up through to France, all the way to Germany. And I mean, there were platoon leaders who were leaving. One guy lost 90% of his platoon in a week at Anzio. I mean, that's what was going on, right? And he came home after 4 years. Imagine, just traumatized. And he got home to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he moved into his, where he was living, and he lived within a few blocks of his 6 brothers who had also all served. And probably 80% of the men in that neighborhood had served. And so there was this common understanding, this shared understanding of what had happened, as I think there probably is in Israel. And that's just the numbers in today's war, today's society, today's military, that's just not going to happen. We're too mobile, and the military is very small relative to our population, and you're not going to move into a neighborhood where you got 6 brothers, like literally brothers in your family who served as well. And that is incredibly buffering of psychological distress, having that proximity of experience.
Sorry, just to piggyback off of that really quick, though, I think that I don't think anybody thinks it's okay to forget about veterans or to let them kill themselves. I think that people often don't give the Marine Corps. My perspective is mostly limited to the Marine Corps. People don't give the Marine Corps enough credit actually for what they do try to do, and I think that people always tell me, "Oh, the Marine Corps doesn't do enough to stop veteran suicide, to do this and that." But honestly, I think the Marine Corps, as an institution, tries really hard. I think they just don't know what to do. I think it's not so much that they don't want to help or that they aren't trying to help. It's just that they have no idea what to do. They have this huge issue where 50% of all suicides are non-combat related in the military, where people are killing themselves, while active duty. Tyler Cohn with 3-3, he killed himself while active duty in Camp Lejeune. And I think the Marine Corps doesn't know how to deal with that. They don't know what the solution is to it. I don't think anybody knows what the solution is to it, because I think a lot of it does go back to mental health. It goes back to a personal situation that is very hard to identify. You can't just look at someone and say, "Oh, he's going to kill himself. Let's do something. Let's put him in a room or get him help or whatever."
We build it.
What's that?
We build it. We make it.
Yeah.
The expectation is built.
Exactly. So I think it's very difficult to find a solution, though. And I don't know if there is a proper, this is the answer to suicide. And it's an ongoing issue that the Marine Corps, on an official level, struggles with very much. And I've personally talked with General Neller about it. I mean, he's, as much trying to fix it as anybody else. But it's hard. It's a hard question.
And our final question for the evening.
Mr. Junger, your idea of having a universal required service for perhaps 2 years, the way they do in Israel, and I believe still in Switzerland, I think is a terrific solution, a way of finding a community that everybody is required to belong to before they go on the path that they will choose for their adult lives. How likely and what can we do to try to make this happen? How likely is it in a country of this size and of this diverse number of opinions about what is politically correct? How do we make this happen?
Well, we could pour out onto the streets and protest and demand national service for everybody. I mean, I don't think Congress is going to do it. I think that impulse has to come from the population that decides that's what we need. You would have to organize. I think we would have to organize a mass movement in that direction, and Congress might listen. Otherwise, they're not. I don't think any congressman is going to Very few are going to push that through if they don't think that the population is something the population wants. But we can do that. If that's what we decide is good for this country, we can do it. And I would say national service, not necessarily military. Like national service with the military option seems like a very fair and wise course. We can do that. It's our country. You just got to want it.
I'm actually one of the few veterans that does not agree with the national service sort of idea on the simple logic of it kind of goes against American freedom, I think, on some level, to force people into some kind of service. And you could argue that it's not that much different than forcing kids to go to school, public school, high school, et cetera. And again, we're not talking about just the military. We're talking about any kind of national service, some kind of mandated program to send people to at a certain age or whatever. But I'm very pro-American freedom in the sense that I don't think that that's an appropriate answer to some of the issues that we have. In my opinion, that's my personal opinion.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you
very
so
much. Thank you.